Movie tie-in games usually have a pretty bad reputation, and honestly, a lot of the time it's well deserved. During the 80s and 90s, publishers rushed out games to match films' releases, and the results were often broken, repetitive, or completely forgettable. But the 16-bit era was different. Somehow, during the SNES and Mega Drive generation, developers managed to create a surprising number of genuinely great movie adaptations. Games that didn't just cash in on a famous license, but actually became classics in their own right. Some had incredible graphics, some had fantastic gameplay, and a few are still considered among the best licensed games ever made. So today, we're looking at the best movie adaptation games released during the 16-bit era. These are the titles that prove film licenses could actually lead to amazing games. Let's get into it. Aladdin is probably the most famous example of two completely different games based on the same movie. The Mega Drive version focused on fast action and incredible animation, with Disney artists helping create the sprites. At the time, it looked unbelievable and really felt like you were playing a cartoon. Meanwhile, Capcom's Super Nintendo version leaned more into platforming and tighter gameplay design. Both versions were excellent in different ways, and fans still debate which one is better today. The Lion King looked amazing on both systems, but it also became famous for being brutally difficult. The visuals captured the film perfectly, the music sounded fantastic in 16-bit form, and the levels like the Elephant Graveyard were incredibly memorable. But many players never even made it past the early stages because of the difficulty. Still, this remains one of the strongest Disney movie games ever released. Batman Returns on the SNES is one of the best beat-em-ups on the system. Konami focused on creating a proper arcade-style brawler rather than just filling the game with awkward gimmicks. The combat felt satisfying, enemies filled the screen, and Gotham had the perfect dark atmosphere from the Tim Burton movie. It still holds up today and is a genuinely fun game to go back to. Jurassic Park is another one of those games that took very different approaches depending on the platform. The SNES version focused more on exploration and atmosphere, while the Mega Drive release pushed more action and even allowed players to control a velociraptor. Neither game followed the same exact formula, but both captured the danger and excitement of the movie surprisingly well for the time. The Super Star Wars Trilogy was ambitious, difficult, and technically impressive. These games recreated scenes from the original Star Wars films with huge sprites, detailed levels, and some excellent Mode 7 effects. They were also incredibly hard, which became part of their reputation over the years. Even now, they still feel cinematic compared to many other licensed games from the era. Alien 3 barely followed the actual movie, but it probably helped it become a better game. Instead of a slow horror, the developers created a tense action game where Ripley rescued prisoners while fighting off endless xenomorphs. The dark atmosphere, fast gameplay, and pressure from timed objectives made it far more exciting than many expected. This resulted in it becoming one of the better Alien games of this generation. RoboCop vs. the Terminator was pure, over-the-top action from start to finish. Explosions filled the screen constantly. The soundtrack was aggressive, and the gameplay moved at a fast pace throughout. It also pushed the Mega Drive hardware surprisingly hard, with large sprites and plenty of chaos happening at once. For fans of those violent 80s and 90s action films, this game delivered exactly what you'd want. True Lies turned the Arnold Schwarzenegger film into a fast-paced top-down shooter packed with explosions and chaos. The shooting felt responsive, the levels were packed with enemies, and the game managed to stay entertaining throughout without becoming repetitive. Explosions filled the screen constantly, giving it the kind of over-the-top action you'd expect from a 90s Arnie film. Toy Story was arguably one of the best-looking movie games of the entire 16-bit era. The animation was impressive, the levels recreated scenes from the film really well, and the gameplay changed things up regularly to keep things fresh. The RC car chase level alone became iconic for many players growing up. But like a lot of Disney games from the time, it was also much harder than people expected. Hook on the SNES became far more popular than the Mega Drive version thanks to its smoother controls and stronger presentation. The game followed Peter Pan through colourful side-scrolling stages while rescuing lost children and fighting Captain Hook's pirates. It played like a classic action platformer and had some genuinely great music throughout. This one's a little overlooked, but it's one of the better licensed games on the system. Indiana Jones' Greatest Adventures combined moments from the original trilogy into one Super Nintendo game. Much like the Super Star Wars titles, it created famous scenes from the films while mixing platforming, combat and vehicle stages together. The presentation was excellent for the time, especially the soundtrack. Again, it could be difficult in places, but it absolutely captured the feeling of an Indiana Jones adventure. The Addams Family surprised people because it turned out to be a genuinely strong platform game. Players explored the Addams mansion while searching for hidden family members, with hidden rooms and secret paths spread throughout the game. The strange atmosphere from the films translated really well into the level design and visuals of the game. Home Alone took a more unusual approach compared to most movie games of the time. Instead of standard action gameplay, players had to protect the house from burglars by setting traps and collecting useful items. It matched the spirit of the film surprisingly well and felt very different from the usual licensed platformers flooding the market. This one's definitely one of the more unique movie adaptations from this era. Demolition Man mixed side-scrolling action with shooting sections and ended up being much better than many expected. The game captured the strange, futuristic setting of the film surprisingly well, and the digitised voices helped it feel authentic back in the day. It's one of those licensed games that people rarely talk about today, but it's still worth revisiting. RoboCop 3 had a rough reputation overall, but the Mega Drive version in particular had some surprisingly ambitious ideas. The game mixed side-scrolling shooting with flying sections using RoboCop's jetpack, and it tried to recreate several scenes from the movie directly. The controls could feel awkward at times, but visually it was impressive for the hardware. It's by no means perfect, but it's still one of the most memorable ones out there. Last Action Hero is another licensed game that turned out far better than people expected. The gameplay mixed side-scrolling action with driving sections, and while it never reached the level of Disney's best movie games, it still delivered solid action throughout. I also felt the presentation did a really decent job of capturing the style of the Arnold Schwarzenegger film. T2 the arcade game brought the fast-paced arcade shooter experience home surprisingly well for the 16-bit hardware. Instead of using platforming or exploration, the game focused entirely on shooting waves of Terminators while protecting human targets across different stages inspired by the film. The action here always stayed intense throughout, especially during the future war levels and the motorcycle chase sequences. The digitised voices and music also helped it feel much closer to the movie than many licensed games of the time. Super Back to the Future 2 is one of the strange entries on this list because it was released exclusively in Japan for the Super Famicom. The game followed the events of Back to the Future Part 2 and played as a side-scrolling action platformer starring Marty McFly using a hoverboard and futuristic weapons. Visually, it looked colourful and captured the style of the movie surprisingly well. For years, this became one of those hidden gems that many Western players only discovered later through imports and emulation, and it's now remembered as one of the more unique movie-based games from the 16-bit era. The 16-bit era proved movie games didn't always have to be terrible. For every rushed cash-in, there were developers creating games that were genuinely fun, visually impressive, and sometimes even better remembered than the films themselves. Whether it was the incredible animation of Aladdin, the brutal difficulty of The Lion King, the atmosphere of Jurassic Park, or the arcade action of Batman Returns, these games showed that licensed titles could absolutely work when the right teams were behind them. Now I'd love to hear from you. What's your favourite movie adaptation game from the SNES and Mega Drive era? And are there any classics you think deserved a spot on this list? If you enjoyed the video today, make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.